Hello and welcome to your library at home. My name is Rebecca. I'm part of the public programs team here at the State Library of New South Wales. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we meet on country this afternoon. I live and work on Gadigal land and take this opportunity to pay my respects to elders past, present, and especially emerging. I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal Australians who are joining us today. Welcome to today's Curator Talk. Today, I'm very pleased to be able to introduce my colleague, Maggie Patton. Maggie is the Manager, Research and Discovery at the State Library of New South Wales. She's responsible for leading the curatorial team, providing advice on activities that develop, interpret and promote discovery and engagement with the significant and unique library collections. Maggie has specialist expertise in rare books and maps and works to enhance discovery and encourage research into these collections. Today, Maggie will be telling us about Incunabula, which are books printed from 1456 to 1500, and she'll be sharing some examples held in the library. I'll be seeing you all again soon to moderate the Q&A at the end of today's talk, but if you could all join me now in welcoming Maggie to the screen.
Hi, Rebecca.
Fantastic.
Nice to see you.
You too.
Shall I start the scary bit now, trying to share my screen?
Absolutely, give it a go and I'll see you at the end.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're right now. Hello everybody, it's nice to see you today. We're here, as Rebecca said, to talk about Incunabula, a generic term coined by English book collectors in the 17th century to describe the first printed books of the 15th century. Formed with two Latin words meaning literally in the cradle or in swaddling clothes. I'm sorry about my colleagues having a conversation at the lift. I'm in the library today. And you can probably hear them chatting. Okay, so the word incunabula formed from two Latin words in the cradle or in swaddling clothes. It's a plural, so in actual fact, a single book would be called an incunabulum, and sometimes this is anglicised for the word incunable. So we're talking about books printed from around 1455 to 1501. So 1455, around 1456, saw the introduction of a printing press with movable type. The printing press solved a nagging problem as the demand for books grew across Europe in the first half of the 15th century, fueled by rising literacy rates in Europe, a rising middle class, and increased numbers of universities, all demanding multiple copies of texts that needed to be used by the students. And the craftsmen really needed a solution of how they could speed up their production. So we're going to have a look at a few examples from the collection as we move along. So of course, before the printing press, you had manuscripts, and this is an example of a psalter in the library's collection from around 1380. So this is on vellum. It would have taken maybe 2 months to copy from a text. It would have been 1 or 2 pages per day. Once the writing had been completed, of course, there was the decoration, the illumination, the rubrication, all of the work that went into creating some of these magnificent manuscripts. And that would take time. Of course, the student and the standard texts that would have been used wouldn't have been so highly decorated, but they all took time to produce. And this printing press was the solution to this problem. So the first incunabulum that we see is the Gutenberg Bible, produced around 1455-56. There is a debate, of course, that it was by Gutenberg, but it's generally accepted. And of course, there was books presented before this period, but they would have normally been done from woodblock printing. And of course, woodblock printing was used in China centuries beforehand, but this was the first time when Gutenberg started to use the movable type. So it took him about 2 decades to actually develop the printing press, And there was a lot of different steps that he had to look into. The first key, of course, was the development of the type, the metal type, which could take the pressure, which could be reused multiple times, and also to try and replicate some of the scripts that were used in manuscripts, because different regions and different types of manuscripts use different printing, different letters. The second key element was the ink itself. In medieval period, scribes used black or brownish ink. Black ink was made by mixing charcoal or lamp black with gum arabic and glue. And so for printing, ink had to adhere very easily to the metal type and dry quickly. And so this was one of the things that Gutenberg had to solve, those problems. And he added linseed oil in a similar way that oil painters added oil to their paints. The third key was the press itself. And to transfer ink from the typeface to the paper, it really needed strong pressure. And so Gutenberg developed the idea of using something similar to a wine press for this particular thing. So the Gutenberg Bible, there are probably around 180 copies produced, 135 on paper, 45 on vellum. Unfortunately, the library doesn't have a Gutenberg. We do have a single page, which is strangely valuable, just a single page, even if it's one that isn't very highly decorated. So these two manuscript pages I've shown you here are very beautiful. You can see the rubrication of the main letters. You can see the illumination over here. And so when the first books were printed, they really followed this idea of the manuscript. So this is an example that we have here from the collection, a collection of sermons published in Germany around 1479. You can see they've retained the two-column ideas of the manuscript. You can see the illuminated letters. This is a very beautiful one here. So you can see when they first start to use the printing press, they are trying to reproduce what everybody is familiar with. This particular one that I have here, we're not looking at bindings today, but this one has a beautiful binding here with those metal bosses to protect the outside of the leather. Now, this is an example of some of the title pages. So as printing develops across the century, they start to look at how books are designed, the layout, and the pages develop differently. So one of the major developments was in the title page. Normally the first leaf of a book can easily be damaged, it can be torn, it can be lost. So in the second half of the 1460s, printers started to make books with the text starting on the second leaf rather than the first leaf. And they started to put some headings on the first leaf, a sort of a very small, basic title page. So you can see here that we have 3 different examples of title pages from Incunabula in our collection. So something here in the center here is very basic. You can see it's probably just perhaps a very brief title there. It's a book from, let me have a look. It's from 1497. I thought this was fascinating actually. It's a book about eschatology, which is apparently concerning death, judgment, and the final destiny of the soul at the end of mankind. Not a really uplifting read, but you can see it's a very basic title page. The one over on the other side is from an astronomy and mathematics book over here. That's from 1496. Whoops, we've gone too far. That is probably not done through type. That's probably been a woodcut that then has been used to create a title page. Now, in around the 1480s, printers start to not just have a small title, but also to have illustrations on the title page. And this particular one here is an example from 1498. And it is in fact, I think the first illustrated edition of Horace, who's a Latin poet and satirist. And that book's from 1498. So you can see how the title pages are changing over time. The other thing, of course, with the introduction of printing and incunabula is about where you would buy your books. So you would go to a print shop. If we go to a bookshop now, of course, we peruse the shelves, we see some beautiful bound books. We might be attracted by the book cover, the dust jacket. But in these days, in the very early time of printing, you would go to a print shop and you would probably find the books just gathered together, the quires gathered together in a bundle without any binding itself. So a print shop might have within their workforce a binder, perhaps a colorist, a rubricator, and then you would get the volume bound. It could be something simple, a simple calfskin binding, a vellum binding. If you were rich, you might actually ask for it to be decorated, and then you would get your covers done beautifully. So it would just depend, but you would actually just collect really initially just a whole bundle of pages. The other thing that, I'm just going to go back a bit here because we skipped a page. The other thing that happens at this period also is the way the page is designed. So you can see in these first two examples, we have the two columns very similar to a manuscript with the decorated letters. But you also have this example over here where suddenly the text is spread across the page. And as you go through these first few years, you see that style developing. You'll see that there is still a space here. And if you look here, you'll see that there's a guide letter there, so that a rubricator might know what letter to put in that space. But so that's how they sort of tinkering between the design of a manuscript and something that will be more sophisticated later on. Now, of course, in this period, before with manuscripts, they would have often been produced on vellum, on calfskin, but with incunabula, with the introduction of printing, we see them now producing these books printed on paper. The paper generally made from rag, a much stronger type of paper than we would see today. And the ink adheres much better to this paper than it would have to the vellum. And of course, the paper making industry is another thing that develops rapidly in the second half of the 15th century. So let's just have a look at now one of the incunabula in the collection here. This is the Liber Chronicarum, also known as the Nuremberg Chronicle, which was printed in 1493. It records the history of the world up until 1493, and in fact they actually put a few blank pages at the end so that you can continue the history of the world. So I don't think really a couple of pages is enough, but that was the attempt back in 1493. It was printed by Anton Koberger, one of Germany's first commercial publishers and printers, and edited by Hartmann Schedel, a doctor based in Nuremberg. The book is divided into 11 parts, the so-called World Ages, and is profusely decorated with illustrations. In fact, it's the most extensively illustrated book produced in the 15th century in this incunabula period. There are over 1,800 illustrations, and over 645 woodcuts were used. But the trick was that many of the illustrations were repeated using the same woodcut. So I'll show you what I mean a little bit later on. The thing about the Nuremberg Chronicle is that they began to, it's really a point at which they're really thinking about the layout of the page. And you can see from some of the later examples where the text and the illustrations are very much a design layout rather than just a replica of what might have happened in a manuscript. So we're seeing that design element in a book develop. There were around 1,500 copies printed of the Nuremberg Chronicle. Initially they were printed in Latin, and then later on they were printed in German and a number of different languages. The library has 3 copies of the Nuremberg Chronicle, all of them in Latin, but all quite different. And the examples that I'm showing you today are from the copy from Sir William Dixon, and it has decorated initials, which is something that the other 2 copies don't have. So I'll just move on now to some of the other pages. So this is the title page of the Liber Chronicarum, and this is just one of the first pages, which is essentially an index. This is then the first ages of the world. And so we start off with, of course, God creating the earth. And this I think I have on the fourth day. And I think that God is creating the heavens and the earth here. But then it moves through to, you can see here, the Garden of Eden. And you can also see the beginning of the second age, which is a beautiful depiction of Noah's Ark, with some beautiful clothing there, very sort of Renaissance clothing here. Not quite what you're expecting in biblical times, but these are beautiful illustrations. So the book is about very much about a Christian view of the history of the world, but it also has the secular history as well. And as you move through, you see that different side of the world. You can see that the printers in this period very quickly realised the importance of adding illustrations. And just as now, when they're developing a book, what's going to appeal to the buyer, what's going to make it an attractive item to have on your shelves, and illustrations quickly become a key part of these incunabula. This is an example of one of the amazing town views that spread across 2 pages. So this is an image of Rome, and you can actually see how the elements of Rome that we would still recognise today. Now, when I said before that they often used the same image for different people or images, the towns. So this is an example where different historical people have been, their images are exactly the same. So here we have Cleopatra looking here, and then we have Agrippina, the elder mother of Nero, with exactly the same image. Here we have Marcus Didius Julianus, Roman emperor, for a short period, and here we have another Roman emperor, Claudius, with exactly the same image. So while it's a hugely illustrated book, there are some shortcuts that they went around to create all of those illustrations. You just need to keep an eye out where you see the same person appearing twice with a different name. The second item I wanted to talk to you about today was a fascinating book called Narrenschiff, or A Book of Fools, which was written by Sebastian Brandt. And it was originally published in German in 1494. The copy that we have in the collection is 1498. So originally in German and then later published in Latin. It was essentially a bestseller of its time. It was an allegory, a ship laden with fools, steered by fools, travelling across to a paradise called Narrowvernia. But essentially, Brandt is describing a whole lot, over 100 different follies and vices, each shown by a different fool. And there's chapters on blasphemy, vanity, marrying for money, gambling, creating too much noise in church. It was incredibly popular. It was one of the more popular secular books printed in this period as opposed to religious works. It also has a number of images that people believe were designed by artist engraver Albrecht Dürer. Over here we have the first page of the Nuremberg, of the Ship of Fools, which shows you the Ship of Fools all falling overboard there. Over here, I just included this. Sometimes these books have beautiful book plates. This is the book plate of Edmund McClure. And he was English, and he owned this in the 19th century. He was the secretary for the Society for the Promotion of Christian Knowledge, very well-known society in the 19th century. But in fact, he came out to Australia and he worked in the goldfields here in Australia and in Peru and served in the American Navy. But he was essentially an English book collector, and that has come into the collection from an English collector, Richardson. This is another page of the Ship of Fools. Now, what is particularly fascinating about this page, other than the fact that it's got this image here, which is quite descriptive, and this one here has, if you have a look at here, it's got a lot of annotations, this copy, which is why it's so fascinating. You can see someone's very clearly underlined the passages that they're interested in. They've made some notes. And over here, you can see what we call a manicule, essentially a medieval version of a highlighter, pointing your way. You can see it's like a little hand, pointing you to the particular line that the reader has thought is important. And there's a number of manicules in this incunabula. Look, this is one of the illustrations I wanted to say, which is called Taking Old Women to Their Wives for Their Riches. So this is an indication of foolishness. And I can tell you, I actually put that title into Google, and the images that came up of modern day men taking women to their wives for their riches was amazing. It took me many pages to get to this image. Anyway, so that's from the Ship of Fools, about the foolishness of some people and their marrying habits. This one here is a page that I particularly like. And once again, it has a manicule in it. It has underlining. And this particular image is about corrupt lawyers and officials, about being wary of good counsellors. And if I move on to the next page, you'll see that there's actually a manicule down here, and it seems to be pointing to a line which suggests that it's pointing out this illustration over here, and it's also referring to a proverb, which I'm not quite sure. I'm just wondering whether it's a very early version of that expression, a pig in a poke, where you buy something or you accept a deal or you accept advice without actually really examining and thinking about it. So maybe they're suggesting that you really need to be careful about what counsel or advice you're given, even when they're given by someone of great repute, and actually consider it, just in case it's a pig in a poke. But who knows? But it's a great image. And if you go across the page here, you'll see where the manicule is actually pointing. Oh, here it is here. It's actually pointing to the line which both refers to the proverb and to this illustration over here. So the Ship of Fools is a fascinating book. It was then produced in English in the 16th century. You might like to try reading the English version, and then you get various facsimiles and other versions of it later in the centuries. But this one here is from 1498. The next book I wanted to talk to you about was the Hypnerotomachia Poliphili by Francesco Cologna. This is printed in 1493 at the very end of this incunabula period, and certainly considered one of the most beautiful incunabula from the period. And you'll see that because of the design of the pages, the illustrations. It looks incredibly modern. So this is the very simple title page from the Hypnerotomachia Poliphili. And it's a love story written by a Dominican monk called Francesco Cologna around 1467. Now, the identity of the author is still disputed, but it can be identified, they believe, through the decorated initials at the beginning of each of the 38 chapters, which apparently read, Brother Francisco Cologna desperately loved Pollia. So Cologna has written this story in a mixture of Italian, Greek and Latin, sort of a made-up language. And it really talks and describes about Poliphili's unrequited love for Pollia. And it talks about a dream he has that he walks through a fantastic world of art, landscape and architecture. And one of the features of the volume are the beautifully designed pages, which we will see as you move along. So there are 39 woodcut initials, 171 beautiful illustrations. And at times they've been attributed to Bellini, Botticelli, but you'll see as you move through. Now here's the title page. This was actually printed by Manutius, Alison Manutius, who became one of the most important early printers based in Venice in Italy. And this is one of the only large illustrated books that he produced. He's much better known for reproducing many of the classics from Greek and Roman times and producing books that are smaller, easy to carry. And he's the person who introduced italics to printing. Okay, so I'll just move through to some of the other pages here. So this is one of the earliest pages here. You can see how the text is spread across the page. We've almost completely lost the idea of the manuscript here. The initial is decorated, but it's printed. It's not decorated after the printing. So it's a very different experience here. Our particular, our copy of this volume was acquired by the library in 1918. So I think I mean, this gives me the opportunity to say that the library has a huge collection of things that aren't about Australia and Australian history, and we've been acquiring them for many, many years. This beautiful page shows you the highly designed pages of this book. You can see how the typeface moves down almost into the shape of a vase and the different layouts. So you can see it's a very sophisticated, it's a very beautifully designed book. And yet this is only 50 years after that first idea of being able to print with type. So you can see how much the book has moved along in its design. A feature of this book is the erotic nature of some of the story and the illustrations, and many of them were censored as being pornographic. So over here you have a woodcut here of Priapus, and in many copies of this has actually been mutilated, and some of the copies in the Vatican have been completely censored. So our copy still has Priapus in all his glory. Over here, this one here, I'm just going to read out what this says here. So the English translation of this particular image says, "I saw upon this superb and triumphal vehicle a white swan in amorous embrace with Thyrsis' daughter, an illustrious nymph of unbelievable beauty. The swan was kissing her with its divine beak. Its wings were down, covering the bare parts of the noble lady." I'm just going to stop there because it gets to snowy white thighs in a minute. So the book is really very different. It's not about science, it's not about mathematics, it's not about religion. It really is an amazing sort of story. Okay, so that's one of the final pages there of our Hypnerotomachia Poliphili. Just before we finish, I might just show you a couple of other interesting incunabula. This one here is Scriptores Re Militaris. It's a very early book on the art of warfare, a very slim vellum volume published in 1487. And I think what's interesting is how you can start to see how they're using type as a way of showing the military tactics and the massings of the pikemen and the cavalry. I think the P is for pikemen, and I think this is the cavalry down here. So it's fascinating the way they start to experiment with different ways of using type to create the content of their books. Here's another example here. And once again, you can see there's a guard letter there that gives an indication of where you might like to put a decorated letter. But essentially, it's looking far more like a modern book. And the final example here I have is from 1482, the Geographia di Francesco Berlinghieri. And it's one of the first printed works which shows Ptolemy's Geographia. It includes 31 maps, as I said, produced in 1482. And you can see now how sophisticated these illustrations are becoming. This particular one shows the world before, of course, a lot of the discovery later on, Europe here, India, China, Africa, but at this point, Africa and the world are they combined by a land bridge across here, and the Indian Ocean is almost like an internal lake. But you can see from 1455 through to 1500 how the book changes and how the illustrations and the layout becomes rapidly more sophisticated. So books also became less expensive, and it's a bit like the shift in the internet in the last 50 years, how we've begun from print to digital so quickly. And this is the same thing in the development of the first 50 years of the incunabula. Currently, there are around 26,500 known incunabula titles produced in this period. And all of them are listed, if you're interested, in the Incunabula short title catalogue that was coordinated by the British Library, I think in the 1980s. The library has around 225 incunabula in the collection. Some from Mitchell, David Scott Mitchell, some from Sir William Dixon, many of them really acquired by the public library in the late 19th century. So thank you for listening. I hope it's been of interest, and hopefully when conditions change, we'll be able to show you some of this incunabula in the flesh and turn those beautiful pages. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Maggie. We do have a quick minute or two if anybody has any questions to come through. We haven't had any throughout the talk, so I'll just give it a moment now. So obviously any questions that do come through after the talk can be sent through to our bookings email address, and we can forward those on. I have one that's come through to say that we usually have new skills or occupations develop when there is a major change. And did new occupations develop with the printing press of these new books?
Well, of course, there's the associated, you know, there would have been a point at which there would have been one, you know, they would have been produced, the various elements, like the paper. You know, there was a whole development in printmaking. There was a whole development in the development of type and the building and the creating of the type. Yeah, there was a whole lot of different professions that developed, and the whole idea of the bookseller as opposed to the publisher, although that takes a long time because initially the printer and the publisher and the bookseller are quite often the same person. But as it moves on, those three roles develop. And of course, the idea of the author. Initially, the author was also the printer and the publisher, but then the author becomes a separate deal. So yes, they do develop over time. Certainly, all of those elements of printing and publishing become into separate elements. Yeah.
Fantastic. Look, we haven't had any other questions come through, but as I mentioned,
okay. You can email them to me, or you can wait until the library's open and come in and see all of these amazing things.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time this afternoon, Maggie. Thank you to everyone who's logged on today. And as I agree with Maggie, I hope to see you all as soon as conditions change and allow us all back. Fantastic.
Bye. Nice to talk to you.
You too.